Carl was just a normal kid, 16, 18-year-old. He had never been to a church in his life. He knew nothing about it. But one day, he and a group of his friends were out, and when they were out, they saw a tent going up down in a paddock. It was not really on the oval, it was offside. And, well, there must be a circus coming to town. And so these boys got a bit excited until one of them said, it's not a circus at all. It's a religious group. They're going to preach down there. So Carl and his friends thought, well, we'd better go and we'll join in the fun. So they got some eggs and they got some tomatoes and they went into the meeting. And when they got into the meeting, there they saw beasts and dragons and lights, and a fellow thundered out words like this: the wicked shall not stand in judgment. Every secret thing shall come into judgment. Man, he was absolutely shocked, and he said to his mates, he said, you know what? This bloke knows what he's talking about. I reckon he's got the truth. Well, Carl was convinced that this fellow had the truth. He was baptized a Seventh-day Adventist. He became a preacher. He became an evangelist. He became a general conference committee member. He was a president of a conference. But those words kept hammering in his head. Those words, the wicked shall not stand in judgment. Every secret thing. Man, he said, I really couldn't synchronize it. He said, I was scared of God. I really never knew God. Well, he's a little older now. And he had a young evangelist coming into his conference. And he asked this fellow to run a series of meetings, and a number thereof. And when he did, he thought, I'll go down and listen to that kid and see how he's going. See what he's talking about. See what he is saying. And he walked into the meeting, and this is what he heard. The young fellow stood up, and he said, we must preach the judgment in the light of the gospel. And Carl was stunned. For 50 years, he had been preaching the gospel in the light of the judgment. He knew that's how it had to go. I want to read you what he said himself. He said, I went out from that meeting that day. I knew God and I was converted. I was converted. You know, the worst picture that we have produced as Seventh-day Adventists, I've cut it back a bit. Where is it? I've cut it back a little bit because you remember the one we used to have with all the angels around it? Some of you have probably seen it, and the angel sitting there with this great... What's wrong with it? Well, we'll come back to that picture in a moment because I want to take it off screen. I'm not going to leave it there to get anyone confused. Where have we been the last few weeks that we've been talking on Revelation or this area? Remember 3 or 4 weeks or a month ago, we talked on Revelation chapter 1. And the very first verse is the verse that gives us the foundation of the book. The revelation of what? Or you could say the revelation about Jesus Christ. It is the revelation of Jesus is this book. And you know, when we know him, there are always fruit of knowing him, immediate fruit. And verse 3 said, blessed are they, or happy are they that know him, and nothing can take away their assurance, their confidence, their joy in him. Well, a little couple were going home from church one day, and a little 11-year-old boy was with them, and there was a donkey standing there leaning over the fence. And the little fella looked up to his mum. He said, you know, Mum, he said, I reckon that donkey's a Christian. And Mum said, what do you mean a donkey a Christian? Well, he said, look at its long... In fact, its lip is held out, just ready to drop in the offering. Is it because we haven't seen him? Is it because we don't know him that we don't have the joy or exude the joy, the happiness? Verse 5 for that chapter, it's from the one that loves you, the one that holds you dear, Verse 7, he said he's coming back again, and the only reason he's coming back again is because we're here. And it is the love of God that draws him to come back, to pick us up, to take us to where he is. Verse 9 said that John was on Patmos. It's not always easy, and he has not promised a flower-strewn pathway all this life through. But God has promised, lo, I am with you how long? Are you sure? Are you confident? You really believe it? Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. And then John looked, and he saw the resurrected Jesus. He saw the glorified Jesus. He saw the post-resurrection Jesus, or the post-Gethsemane Jesus. And when he saw Jesus, he fell down as dead. He was a sinner in the presence of God. And what did God do? He reached down and picked him up. John, stand up. I'm the first and the last. I've purchased you. You are faithful and just to forgive us. The nearer we come to Jesus, the more sinful we appear in our own eyes. True or false? Come on, true or false? You think you're good enough for heaven? Because if you do, you're good enough for hell. Only through him. And Jesus picked John up. The very first book of the Bible we see where that plan went into operation to save people. God reaching down and calling to Adam, reaching down and picking Adam up, promise him salvation. Now the last book, reaching out and picking up John. John, you're one of mine. Then we came to this first angel's message. And the first foundation, the basis of that angel's message is the gospel. And it said there in the everlasting gospel, salvation is in Jesus alone, but everlasting means it must have a long life. Well, it doesn't. It's endless either direction. Before creation, God had a plan, and he had the plan for redemption, the plan of salvation laid out for us. Sadly, in Genesis chapter 3, that plan had to go into operation. And God reached out to Adam and Eve. As soon as they sinned, he was calling them. He was seeking them. He was searching for them. The only person that ever lived sinlessly on this earth is Jesus. And you know what I rejoice in? Paul says we are saved by his life. We are saved not by our own miserable deeds, as good or bad as they might be. We are saved by his life. Jesus imputes, and I'm using that word. We know what impute means nowadays. We used to have two words in Adventist theology, impute and impart. Well, impute means it credits to you. It's yours, it's given to you, but you've done nothing about it. It's just imputed to you. Impart means it's given to you as a present. You put it in your pocket and you go and spend it. So he is imputed. He has imputed his complete victory, complete righteousness to us. And the everlasting gospel changes lives. And we saw that in the life of Peter. So let's go on. Revelation 14, 6 and 7. I haven't written this one up on the board, but I want to see and test your memories. Do you know it? Three angels' message. First angel, and really we're just sticking with the first angel. So it says in the first one, Revelation 14, 6, I saw another angel fly in midst heaven, having the what? The everlasting gospel, the preaching of those that dwell on the earth, saying with a loud voice, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his... I don't like it, do you? The hour of his judgment has come. When we think of judgment, what do we think of? We think of some poor fella being dragged before a court. Some poor person's guilty of some crime, and they're getting dragged and justice is going to be meted out. Has he got a solicitor? What will happen to him? You ever had to go to court? You know, I remember one time when we were living in Fiji, I had a fellow that had actually been cut with a knife, and we had to get him to a hospital to get him sewn up. And so I drove rather quickly. In fact, too quickly for the cops. And they didn't like it. They saw me coming down there and they just wrote this number plate down, and next thing, I got a summons to appear in court. Well, I wanted to tell the judge and tell him all about the story and get away with it. I got to that court and I was fearful and I was trembling and I was waiting. And next thing, I heard the court crier. And he walked outside the court. There were hundreds inside. He walked out there and he bellowed my name out into the street. He turned around and he bellowed in the looking for Raymond William Eaton. I walked down there in that box and I was that dead scared. As soon as the judge something, I said, all right, $20, out you go. It was scary. What's it like in God's court? Is it a little bit scary? Because when we read Ecclesiastes, when we read 1 Corinthians and Daniel, it says, every secret thing shall come into judgment. Is that a little bit scary? Now just let's pretend I've got magical powers and I scribble up on the board your thoughts of the last 2 days. And they're up there for everyone to read. How many people are going to come to church? Yes. Every secret thing shall come into judgment. Paul said, for all must appear before the judgment seat. Daniel said, there's a great crowd of witnesses. The books are open and there they are. Is that a little bit scary? Is that a little bit scary? If you said no, you're lying. Remember, we are saved by his life. We are saved by his life. All those things are true. Don't denigrate them. Don't take them down. Don't disbelieve them. They're all true. But they're true in this. Jesus is my substitute. His life, his thoughts, his actions are accounted as mine. It's not fair. It's not fair to God, but it's good news to me. You hear what I'm saying? It's not fair to God, but it's good news. God's grace is not fair, but it's only unfair to God. It's good news to humanity, not by our own miserable deeds. John tells us the same on the road Revelation. He said, we have an advocate. We have a good solicitor. Hebrews says we have an intercessor. That means we've got a solicitor. And I'm glad this solicitor knows the judge. He knows the accused and he knows the accuser. He knows how to answer. There, Paul, that said a minute ago, we're all going to appear there. He also said in Romans 8, there is no condemnation to those that are in Christ Jesus. So I'd like to ask you a question. Are you in him? Do you have him? Do you rely on him? There is no condemnation to those that are in him. Just imagine, that court's there, the arguments are there. There's no condemnation. Daniel was one that frightened us a while ago with all those angels with that great long pen and those books were all open and all the rest of it. He just dropped down to verse 22 in the very same chapter and he said, and judgment is given in favour of God's people. We have nothing to fear for the future. Favour, God's people. We are saved by his life. Every secret thing of him is judged for us. Now, I was going to talk about David for a moment and just talk on how that David was really looking forward to God's judgment. He had no fear of the judgment. He used many expressions. We can flick this slide up and we'll go past it fairly quickly if you want to take them down there. Because I don't think any of us are much worse than David. Scheming, miserable, lying, adulterous, murderous David. And yet he could say, I'm looking forward. You see, those people knew God, they knew our God, they knew their God, and they didn't govern by a Westminster system. They weren't limited in their thinking as so often we are. They knew God and his ways. I want to go down now, see that picture we saw a moment ago, and something's gone wrong here. We'll go down to that picture we saw a moment ago, the worst picture. And I want to show you what that picture ought to look like. Let's have a look. Are you with me? Do you agree? And I've lost the rest of what I was going to say, but anyhow, that doesn't matter. Flick up the next picture, we'll remember. Okay, I want you to go now in your thinking, and you can look it up, Zechariah chapter 3, verses 1 to 6. And there is a judgment scene in the Bible, and a judgment scene of God's judgments. And you'll see there that Joshua is called in, and he's the sinner. He's actually a high priest, but he's in there. And the accused is there, the accuser is there, the judge is there. They're all there. And the devil is there as the accuser, and he stands up ready to accuse him. And before he can open his mouth, Jesus, have a look at verse 3. Jesus said to the devil, get out, get lost. This is mine. If we confess our sin, he is what? He is faithful. He is just to forgive. When the devil comes up with all his arguments, he is faithful. He is just to forgive us our sin. Good, yep. All right, we'll go on to the next one now. If we confess, he is faithful. Do we really believe it? Or do we hang on to them? If we confess our sin, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sin. John 5, you will not come into judgment. He who believes has eternal life. And then John chapter 3, where Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. And you notice all the whosoevers in John chapter 3. John chapter 3, starting at verse 14, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Whoever believes on him, look and live. Why? Verse 17, verse 18, he repeats it again. Whoever believes in him has eternal life already. Up the back, that's the way to do it. We had a system in Australia, and we used to call it blackbirding. Anyone ever know what blackbirding was? Yep, we know what blackbirding was. Some do. Blackbirding was a time when we went out to the different Pacific Island groups, and we got people to come here to work on the cane fields and the sugar cane. And we paid them. We gave them, at the end of 3 years, we gave them a bush knife, or we gave them an axe or something, and took some of them back to their own lands. A lot of them we didn't take back. But in America, it was far worse. They had a terrible slave trade. And there was a fellow there by the name of Joe. And Joe had been a slave for a long time. And now the owner wanted to sell him to redeem or to realise the asset. This great big fella could work as hard as a horse, and he had plenty of stripes across his back to prove that he had had the whip a few times. And he took him to the market and tied him up to a post, and he was to be auctioned. But everyone that came to look at Joe, he would bawl at them, I won't work. He would mutter, I won't work. Well, they'd crack the whip, they'd show the whip, they'd say, when you get a taste of this, you'll do as you're told. Joe, I won't work. But there's one fellow that came around, he looked a bit different to the other fellows, and Joe yelled at him, I won't work. And this fellow just walked on. The auction came around, and as it was coming around and back to that area, it was yelling, and the auctioneer was trying to excite people and get the more money he could, the more commission he got, and he was selling Joe. And Joe could see the people bidding for him. And when he saw one fellow bidding, he said, I won't work, I won't work. He looked at the next bloke, I won't work, I won't work. And eventually, I sell, and Joe was sold. Well, a new owner came in after the auction and moved on, and he undid the chain from Joe's feet and took him out to his carriage. And then he got down on his hands and knees and undid the lock from the chain. He undid the lock from the arms. He said, Joe, run away quickly. I have purchased your freedom. You are not a slave. Go before something worse happens to you. And Joe just fell at his feet. And he grabbed that man and he said, please, sir, I want to work for you forever. I want to be your servant forever. Can I stop with you? Now tell me, what made the difference? What made the difference? I won't work. I want to work forever. When Joe knew he was free, when Joe knew he was respected, when Joe knew he was loved, he didn't want to get out of it. Listen, you and I, we know we are free. We have been redeemed. We have been purchased. Do you want to live for him? Because I do.